So we're finally at the point where we can do the tech reveal on the new Titleist T100, 150, 200, 350 and driving iron. So this has been embargoed until 2 p.m. today, so hence the video's out at 2 p.m. today. So there've been a lot of images about the heads out there online for the last few weeks. So a lot of golfers are aware of what the new products look like, but we haven't been able to talk about the actual structures and the changes in the actual design principles of the heads that create the differences in performance. So what we have the T100, T150, T200, T350 as the broad irons taking over from T100, T100S, T200 and T300, and then the T200 and U505 driving irons that roll over from last couple of years models. So there are a couple of elements that all of the heads incorporate. So there have been some updates in the structures that every single model has. And one of them has been the turf interaction. So one of the things that Titleist have done is they've gone to the Vokey design team and looked at a variable bounce profile on the soles. So it's not just on wedges that the turf interaction, the sole shape is important, it's on irons as well. So you take another brand, Srixon, with their variegated sole shape, that beveled sole profile, that's all about turf interaction. So this is what Titleist, I'm using the 505 because it's the biggest sole, so it should hopefully give you the best visual on it. What they've done is they've used slightly beveled leading edge, then a flatter middle, and then a graduated back edge. So in the same way on a wedge, you'd have that back edge getting out the way. That's one of the aspects that helps the turf interaction, helps the back edge not catch the turf on its way through. And obviously the beveled leading edge, the killed leading edge, that means it's harder for that leading edge to dig in. So that's something that across all of the models, they've integrated into every single head to a varying extent. Obviously the wider the sole, like in the 505 there, the more variegation you're going to get, a little bit less on the T100. The other aspect is the previous series had tungsten in the sole as well, as do all of these, but they've gone to the D18 tungsten. So it's a D18 tungsten, but it's also, in the way it's integrated into the heads, they're brazing the metals together to create the space for the tungsten weighting to go in. So rather than a batch across, there are now a heel and toe weighting. So it's a much denser tungsten than they had in the past. But the importance of the brazing versus welding. So the two methods of joining and bonding metals together. Welding, the metals have to be fairly similar to one another because it's a very, very extreme heat that melts and bonds the metals together as they cool. What brazing does is it allows you to join metals that have non-similar properties. So if you have two completely different constructions of metal, two different properties, but that have one that has great characteristics for the face and one that has great characteristics for weight placement, if they don't have similar melting points, it's very hard to bond them together. So what brazing does is there's a material that goes in between the metals that creates a lot less heat, so you're not changing the actual properties of those metals at all, but it creates a very strong bond as well. So when you're joining multiple materials together that don't have similar properties, sorry for the physics lesson here, the brazing method is a superior method. So from a metallurgy, which is the science of the metal point of view, you're not changing the properties of those metals and you're able to bond them together securely. So it allows them to use more materials, but also more specifically placed materials. There's no wastage, there's no extra material there created by the welding process. So that goes across all of the products. Now, T100, T150. So again, there are properties that, and these two are really based on the same frame. I'll start with the 100 and we'll move into the 150. So T100, a very, very similar shape of head, very classic shape, very neat top line. And they haven't changed the base frame shape of the head. It's still got, as you'll see here, a very, very clean top line and a kind of Tour-inspired, vertical Tour-inspired shape. So structurally what the changes are, they've got a strengthened bar across the center of the back of the head. And what that does, that makes the framework a little bit more rigid. But also by making it stronger, they can save weight in places within the head. So they can put a little bit more weight into the heel and the toe with the tungsten, go a little bit thinner on the top of the face. But that then allows by moving the weight more into the heel and the toe, you're improving off-center strikes. So certainly that back bar across the face, that's one of the key elements. What they've also done on both the 150 and the 100 is they've CNC milled the face. So this is about getting accuracy, you're getting consistent face thickness, getting as neutral a face shape, taking all the variables out possible. The milling process is just more accurate. So it makes a little bit of weight saving from that milling, again, positioning it more exactly within the frame of the head to give the best in terms of forgiveness. But also what that bar and that milling does is it affects the sound a little bit. So one of the key things is keeping that feel and sound soft. So again, the type of tungsten in the heel and the toe, that bar across, that allows them to manipulate the note of the head. And it leads to a little bit more efficiency, a little bit better off-center, and it allows them to progress the launch and the spin a little bit more. So on the 100 in particular, you've got weight lower in the head that helps lower strikes to get the ball airborne, a little bit more launch, and especially on a low contact. But the rigidity of the bar across also helps on those slightly higher strikes as well, so distance consistency. Into the 150, they've changed the shape of the head very slightly. The one criticism of the 100S, well, there were a couple, one was sound, was that it was visually quite intimidating. So what they've done, now the 150's on my left-hand side, you can see the sole is a little bit wider. They've made the heel to toe length and the offset is exactly the same as the T100, but that extra bit of width on this head, just visually, there's a little bit more margin of error. There's a little bit more to look at. The top line's not quite as thin. So visually, there's a bit more friendliness to the head. But by dragging the weight back a little bit more, by making that wider and incorporating that tungsten, that more dense tungsten into the sole, it gives a little bit more stability. It gives a bit more resistance to twisting, and you get a bit more forgiveness out of the head. What they've also done is they've refined, I'll hold it at this angle, the channel in the back of the head there. They've refined that. So you've still got the channel within the back of the head, but what it does is they've refined, now the exact structure of this, we're still getting some extra info through. Exactly how they've refined it, not quite got the details of yet, but we'll feed back to that as soon as we get that info. The material's that same slightly softer material that was in the back of the 100, but they've managed to move it closer to the face. So the slight change in the way that the channel's been cut and the material in the back has allowed them to take a bit of weight out the face, allows them to make the face a little bit faster, but moving it closer to the face affects the sound off the head a little bit, dampens that sound down slightly. So by moving it closer, you can move more weight lower and further back. That helps with a little bit of launch. And the 100S was quite punchy from a flight point of view, so that helps just pick that launch angle up a little bit, and then has the added benefit of moving the weight further from the face, making it a little bit more forgiving. So 150 and 100, the same platform, so the 100 head is the main platform that the 150 is being derived from, but just giving that a little bit more forgiveness, a little bit more flight. And the 150 is a standard 2 degrees stronger, so being designed to be that little bit stronger, to give that a bit of extra distance and a little bit of extra performance. So that's the 100 and the 150. We then move to really quite a different construction of head. Again, I'm going to go through the consistencies between the 200 and the 350, which are the more forgiving-oriented heads, or forgiveness-oriented heads, should I say. So there's also that D18 tungsten. That's the same as the 100 and the 150. They've taken that across every single model. What you get out of these are hollow-framed heads. So where it looks like a blade in the back, as does the 350 with that covering in the back, it's actually a hollow construction. So what they've managed to do with that is within the head, on the inside, there's some weight through the bottom here with that tungsten weighting, but there's a bar that sits diagonally across the back that way. So from toe through to the sort of upper center of the head. And what that does, that structurally reinforces the head. So that gives it some rigidity, which again, that frame stiffness allows, it stops the energy being dissipated through the frame of the head if it distorts. So when you reduce the distortion, the energy goes back through the frame of the head back into the face. So you're getting a better deflection of energy back into the ball. That allows them to go a little bit thinner on the face, but they've also, behind the face and on the back of that bar, there's a material which they use to deflect the sound and the energy back into the ball. So I'm going to get the terminology absolutely spot on for for you, don't want to get that one wrong. It is called the Max Impact Tech. So it's a polymer material that sits in behind the face and on that back support bar that, much like the cutaway in the back of the 150, they've moved that a little bit closer to the face. So the face going a bit thinner, taking that closer to the face, one affects the sound a little bit, but it allows the engine to go straight back into the face a little bit more. So it augments ball speed. The slight change in the face thickness allows the weight to go a little bit deeper. And again, as the other heads, dual tungsten in the sole and the heel, in the toe and the heel, sorry, then gives you that off-center performance where you've got mass behind the off-center strike points, which stops the head twisting, which means better energy transfer into the back of the ball. So, and with the T200, it's the same blade length as the T100 and 150. So from a blending point of view, what they've done, particularly with the 200, the 150 and the 100, is produce some heads that you can blend and you can split between that visually are very, very similar. So that's something that Titleist have really taken a key element of their design, is that they want this to be a set of blended heads. So on tour, you've got tour players playing all 4 of these heads within their bags. So the fact that these are being played at the top level, and I think 80% of the blended sets on tour are Titleist heads. It's a stat that Titleist have put out there. I hope I've got that right. But their heads do lend themselves to that split through with that progression in performance, progression in launch, and progression in ball speed. So the visuals are something that are really key to that. So in the 350, so this is the update from the T300. So very, very similar from the back to the T200. So you can see you've got that infill covered in back, and in the same way as the T200, we've got that support bar running toe to upper center. The same material on the back of the face, that same Max Impact technology, that polymer material on the back of the face, again moved closer to the face as they have in the than it was in the 300. Again, softens, dampens the sound down, dampens the vibration down, makes the head a little bit less clicky, which was one of the criticisms of the Titleist heads last model, but again rebounds the engine to the back of the ball. So they've managed to augment ball speed a little bit out of this. But this head is a noticeably, again, sorry to go back to these heads, a noticeably thicker top line than the T200 here, T350 here. So they've gone to a head that has a slightly bigger frame, a little bit longer heel to toe, but visually there's a lot more club head to look at. So really kind of majoring on the forgiveness aspect of this. So by getting the weight out of the back, getting the weight out of the face, putting the weight low and far back, that's maximizing height relative to loft, maximizing forgiveness. This is all about forgiveness, this head. And certainly on a cross-face performance, proves very, very strong. So between the main models of head, we've got a real progression in center gravity in terms of low and far back. We've got a progression in ball speed from the 100 to the 150 to the 200 and 350. I think 200 and 350, one would say, are quite similar. But there's that bit of extra forgiveness on the 350 versus the 200. So there's a real progression through the heads. And I think they cover off really quite nicely, real player's cavity iron in the T100 through actually an incredibly playable iron in the 350. So we'll go briefly into the driving irons, and then I'm going to hit a couple, describe the feel, describe the performance. We've got a few numbers that I've gathered already just to save a little bit of time. And then we can go through where you're going to see the differences between those heads. So we'll touch on the driving irons next. So to go back briefly to the 350, in the 300 it was a kind of a single piece cavity back construction. And the 350, what they've done versus the 300 has gone to a multi-material construction. So rather than, there are more elements that have gone together to create the head from different materials. Again, this is where the brazing helps to not have that sort of compromise to have to make on construction versus what you can do with the metals themselves. So that's where the 350 is really quite a major change in base profile and construction from the previous model, more so than the 200, 150 and 100. So very, very different construction there. So into driving irons, you've got the T200U there and the U505. So turn the toe end on and you'll see a massive difference in sole width. So that same kind of progression and shaping to the sole, just exaggerated with the 505. So that toe end on view shows you the amount of cavity and the amount of depth to the U505, nearly said 350, to the U505 head versus the 200. The 200 is, this might sound a really stupidly obvious comment, is a T200 head, but the utility head, the U version, is designed more to be a driving iron to someone playing a T150 or a T100. So the 4-iron head in the 200U is 2 degrees weaker than the 4-iron head in the iron set T200, because these are really designed to get that little bit more forgiveness, a little bit more launch versus a 100, 150. The weaker loft also blends with those heads a little bit better. So it is a different loft, different base loft between the two. So from our point of view, when we're building sets, we need to be careful to make sure we order the correct head. But the T200 iron set stops at 4-iron, and then they go into whether it's a 505 or the driving iron side of it, but the loft progression changes into the utility iron. Otherwise, it's the same as the T200s. So that hasn't changed from last year. 505, now what they've done this year, they go 1-iron, 2-iron, 3-iron, 4-iron. So it's 16, 18, 20 and 22 degrees. So to go down to the 1-iron option, there aren't many clubheads that do a 16-degree driving iron. But this one's really designed around maximizing forgiveness, getting launch, and getting forgiveness. So again, progression off the 350. So again, a very, very wide sole, allows them to get the weight very low and far back from the face. Now, where the 200 and the 350 have a variable face thickness, so much like a driver, it's a dual progression face. This one has a single progression face. Again, this is an aspect I'm trying to get a little bit of extra clarification on exactly how the two vary, and we'll major on that in another video when we get that information. But this one's really to improve performance a little bit more into the heel side. So on the 200 and 350, slightly smaller head shapes, they've gone a little bit more kind of thick, thin across the face. This one, it's a single taper profile as described by Titleist in their terminology. So, but the ultimate appeal, the ultimate aim of that is to improve ball speed consistency into the heel side. And so that's how they differentiate between the single taper face profile and the dual taper variable thickness. One other aspect actually in the 200, 350 and this, the face is an L face, so it goes through the face and around into the sole, so it actually wraps around the bottom. And what that does for all models is increases ball speed low on the face. So that's kind of a real, they're doing that with Woods, Ping with the wraparound on the face have done that quite a long time. That's being incorporated into irons to improve low face performance. And they've done that through the hollow body construction of the 200, 350 and the U505. So within this, there's really, again, progression off the 350. This is really about getting higher launch, getting maximum forgiveness. It's a very, very similar bit of technology through the 350 other than that face tech. There's not an awful lot to add. I think versus previous model, there's that little bit more progression, certainly that back edge relief on this one versus previous model is a little bit more aggressive. So that should get it traveling through the turf a little bit quicker. But I say very much designed as that progression off the 350s to maximize forgiveness, maximize launch profile at this end of the bag, and visually a little bit neater. They've majored on making this just a little less, for a better phrase, clumsy looking, slightly neater through the top line, and a little bit of a cleaner head shape, although still that little bit bigger than the other models. So hope that all makes sense. Sorry to rattle through a load of verbals describing it all, but there's a few bits and pieces to go through. What we'll do first up is James can switch to the data screen. I can talk you through. I've done some shots with the already with the various heads, and I'll hit a couple more as we go through. But just to talk through the different flight profiles and performance variables that you're going to see between the models. So at the top of those four is the T100. And sods law, just for the way I did the data, the 150, which I'm going to compare it to most directly, is at the bottom. So what we can see out of each of these, I've kept club speed pretty consistent through. You can see I've warmed up a little bit as I got to the 350. I've got a mile an hour more club speed. But what we can see as we go through, ball speed progresses a little bit with each model, but the 100 to 150, we can see whilst there's a 2 degree difference in loft, the launch angle's almost the same. It's only 0.3 of a degree difference, whereas you'd expect it to be a little bit more, but spin has come down 500 revolutions. So that's one aspect of the head that you'd expect from the T150 being stronger lofted. But what we're also getting is a little bit more efficiency. The smash has gone from 142 to 144. So there's roughly, there's about a half a club, 5 or 6 yards difference between the two for me. And we'd expect to see similar performance gain for most players switching between the models, but the differentiation from last year is the 150 launch angle is closer to the 100 in terms of actual launch angle, whereas the 100S came out a little bit flatter. And as we move into the 200 and 350, a little bit more ball speed again, efficiencies move up slightly off the 150, but the spin drops just a little bit. Only a little bit between 200 and 150, so 200 to 150 is a ball speed gain. So we picked up another couple of yards from that, but the spin's quite consistent. And 350, a hair stronger launch, but the spins drop that a little bit more. Now, as you drop the centre of gravity in the head, as the centre of gravity drops more towards the bottom of the head, I'll get James actually to switch back to this camera now, so that as you move the centre of gravity lower in the head, proportionally the ball strikes higher up relative to centre of gravity, and what that does is as it strikes, the head does that and the ball rolls down the face. So actually a low centre of gravity head creates low spin. A high centre of gravity head, you strike low, does that and the ball rolls up, so you retain spin. So this is why a blade spins more than the cavity back. But to go back to, there's another but here, but for heads of that forgiveness as the 200 and 350, what we've traditionally seen is spin knuckle a little bit, and that's actually something that Titleist's done really well to retain that spin. So you're not having to give up too much spin. If you take from the T100, which is traditionally a higher spinning head, we're only really given up 15% of spin to the 350, but as a result you get a club more distance. So actually as an actual spin retention, that's really pretty good. I think what we're going to do next, I'm going to hit a couple with each of these, just literally one or two, and just describe from a feel point of view and sound point of view what those differences make versus previous models. So the 100 has the least differences between them. I think the biggest difference is rather than that one bar of tungsten at the bottom, splitting it, going more dense and splitting it. And it's what it does to the stability of the head at impact. So from a feel point of view, it's still very classic traditional look. It's still a fairly muted note off the head. It's still quite a pretty soft sound. Anytime you put tungsten into a head, you're going to get a slightly firmer note out of it. But what I picked up immediately hitting these first out was how the head felt like it stayed with the ball at contact rather than twisting and deflecting. So that's certainly something, I think, from a sensation of forgiveness, it's a very, very stable head. So yes, retains sort of mid-launch, mid-spin. So it's not a hot distance iron, but there's a little bit less of a click and a slightly less firm note off the face with this. I think that's where there's a bit of an augmentation performance-wise. So I'll switch up to the 150. Over. So I think one of the things that's immediately noticeable with this when you're coming from the 100, it's not quite as aggressive a top line as the previous version was, which really looked really quite thick. It's not big, they've still chamfered and angled the top edge to make it look as clean as possible, but it doesn't look quite as aggressive as the 100S did, albeit it's not a big head either. So so to strike with, definitely again a little bit of an augmentation in terms of that stability. And by that I mean it feels, so the head just doesn't, you don't notice a miss hit quite as much, would be the best description for it. Certainly feel like the weight's sat a little bit further back from the face. It with the channel in the back, with that cutaway in the back, there's a little bit more of a note to it. There's a little bit more ball speed, but it's not as harsh a note as the T100S was. So I mean, you strike, you still get that little bit of a pop. There's still that little bit of a higher pitch note than the 100. It gives a little bit of a snap and a little bit of sensation of speed, but it's not as noticeable. And so I think, you know, on those two in particular, there's a very, very noticeable improvement in you just don't. I don't think you're going to notice as much of a, don't want the driving on, not notice as much of a mishit as one would have done in the past. And so that's all to do with that, the slight changes in weight, the slight, you know, savings in weight from the face, and that tungsten positioning in the heel and toe. So we'll move on up to the T200. Use the same ball. So this is going to produce a different note. Now we go to the hollow construction. That very kind of light, thin backing to the head, that does change the sound of the head quite a bit. Now, say heel to toe, still the same frame shape as the 100, 150, but you start to see a little bit more top line on this one. Again, still angled, the same way Titleist always have done to make it appear clean. But certainly that little bit of a louder note off the head that goes alongside the thinner face, the thinner back material, the hollowed out chamber. You're going to get a little bit more of a, for want of a better phrase, more sort of rattling around of the sound in the back of the head. It creates that different note. But again, that same feeling of it. You kind of feel like you can hit it pretty much anywhere on the face. That was a bit of a slap, strike-wise, a little higher up the face, but I didn't get that jarring of the head and that twisting. So again, dispersion, left to right dispersion stayed very, very good. I know I didn't middle it, but actually still came out pretty well, all things considered, for a horrible strike. Then move up to the 350. So this is the first one you really notice the change in shape because of that top line. You know, really quite a different visual to set up over. So you really notice that you've got a more forgiving head in your hands. I think this is the head the 300 series over the years Titleist have been underrated for in terms of how much margin of error you've got with the head. You know, it's a noticeably more forgiving head. It doesn't look too offset because of the line through the neck there, but I think visually this one's a little bit more appealing to someone who's looking for forgiveness. Again, that little bit more of a crack off the face. The hardness of note is just kicked up a little bit more, again, through them pushing the tungsten, pushing the face thickness a little bit more, pushing the speed. You're going to get a little bit of a harder note and a harder sound, which is part of what makes it feel fast off the face. There again, that was a little bit on the heel side, but ball speed maintenance is very, very good. And so that again, that's throughout all of the irons, it's that feeling of stability across the face. I think that's something that Titleist have historically not had compared to other brands as much of. And certainly one of the things they're really keen to do is to gain that without losing that traditional forged, you know, Titleist feel. Now certainly with the 100 and the 150, that's easy to achieve with that construction. The moment you go hollow bodied, you're going to get a bit more of a click. However, I don't think that's as anywhere near as loud or as noticeable as it's been in previous models. So, but the forgiveness aspect, that's something that Titleist have majored on this year, and I think they've done really well with that. So certainly very, very user-friendly for those head shapes. And then finally, a couple of hits with each of the driving irons. You know, these, certainly the 200 isn't going to be for everyone. This is really aimed more at your T100 150 player who just wants a bit more launch and a bit more performance out of their longer irons. You know, long irons are something that we're doing less and less of. You know, there are still going to be players who want to play a driving iron. I still play a driving iron, but the 200 this year, so just designed to keep a little bit more launch on. The T200, I think last year felt it was a very strong performance out of it, which good on the one hand, but on the other hand, actually made it it wasn't that friendly. You create a launch angle that wasn't that much spin. So back to a very, very neat head shape. That heel to toe length is still quite compact. which is standard Titleist. You don't notice the back edge too much either, which is quite nice. It's certainly what the kind of the lower handicap player would generally be looking for. So again, once you go into the 3-iron, they're thinning the face out, trying to max out speed. Then there's that sound, that feeling of energy off the face. But one of the differences on this one is ball speed efficiency at 147 is very good, but the spin rates up above the 3,500 mark, which for me with a 20-odd degree head, I would often be a little bit lower than that. So I'll do one more. But again, the spin retention across all of Titleist models is something that's notable. Again, a little bit lower launch at 11.5, but 3.6 on spin. And actually, whilst it's a bit of a harder sound, a bit of a harder kind of snap note off the face, again, it's a really, I know I keep going back to it, it's a really stable feel. I think I've traditionally always liked a softer sound. I play a Strixon driving iron personally, but currently, but that from an off-center performance, very, very, very solid. Very good. Be very hard to notice much of a deflection off the face with that. So certainly that again is definitely an improvement on the previous model. And then to go into the 505 as the final head. And if you've lasted this long through the video, we're very grateful. You've done very well. So again, much like the 350, visually much bigger head. You can really see the back edge of it. It's a much thicker top line, slightly longer heel to toe, so a friendlier looking head. Certainly a little bit of a higher launch there. So that was maybe slightly higher up the face, but certainly picked that ball up a little bit more. Yeah, ball speed down a little bit, so caught that slightly high up the face. And I've compensated and gone lower on the face, but again, 1300 launch, 3.7 on spin. So similarly, picking that ball flight up a little bit more. And I think some of this is going to be having a head that looks user-friendly at this end of the bag. But again, ball speed for slightly low on the face, 145 efficiency, 212 carry from that swing, 214 on the better on the T200s. Both nice strong performances across the face. And they're giving options at each part of the bag, giving you options, something that's more forgiving, higher launching, a little less forgiving, a little lower launching, but very good off-center performance across the board. So that covers everything on the Titleist Iron series. As and when we get the slight updates from Titleist on the face variation, any additions to some of the information we get, we will feedback. We'll update videos on those. Thank you very much for watching. We've got, as you can see, we've got all the demos in-house now to fit with, and come in, get fitted, test them out. I think really strong performance for them this year. I think they've done a very good job in progressing and augmenting their previous products, and I hope you come in and test them out soon. Thanks a lot.